What would you do if one day, after sacrificing 40 years of your youth for your children, you received a 12,800 Oz cruise ticket, but it turned out to belong to someone else? Maggie didn't cry. She simply put on her expensive silk suit, stepped onto the luxury ship, and began a journey to reclaim justice for a mother who had been treated cruelly.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Maggie. I'm 68 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I've learned something about silence in my 68 years. It doesn't visit suddenly. It seeps in, quietly, politely, until one day you look around and realize it's the only companion you have left. That Tuesday afternoon, the sky over Ohio was the color of unwashed steel, heavy, exhausted, and too familiar. I was standing on the small porch of the guest house when Amber appeared at the top of the steps of the main house. She always walked like she owned the ground under her heels, even though that ground once belonged entirely to me and Daniel. She lifted her chin slightly, a polished gesture she'd mastered over the years, and called out, "Maggie, we'll be heading out soon. The Uber is almost here." Behind her, Nathan hovered, tall, handsome in that clean corporate way, but uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He didn't smile, not even a small one. I could tell from the way he tucked his hands into his pockets that he didn't want this conversation. Or maybe he just didn't want to be the one to deliver the line they'd prepared. Amber stepped forward, lips forming a smile that was warm for everyone except me. "We're going on a cruise," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just 10 days. Nothing fancy, not with how tight things have been financially." Financially tight. The words hit me with the gentleness of a brick. "Oh," I answered, offering the softest smile I could manage, the kind that hides disappointment so well it begins to look like acceptance. "I see. Well, you two enjoy yourselves. You deserve some rest." I doubt they noticed how I held my breath between syllables. Nathan finally spoke, still not looking at me. "Yeah, it'll be good to unplug for a bit." Unplug. He'd been unplugged from me for years. Amber didn't linger. She turned, already halfway down the steps. "We'll bring you back something cute, okay?" Cute. Like I was a neighbor's dog they occasionally remembered to feed. The front door closed behind them. A soft click. But for me, it echoed like the slamming of a gate. I stood in the quiet living room of the guest house, the one they referred to as my private cottage, though it was really just the renovated pool house I paid to build decades ago. The heater rattled to life, pushing warm air that smelled faintly of dust into the corners. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because something inside me had suddenly gone rigid. On instinct, my feet carried me toward the narrow hallway where the old coat rack sat. Hanging on the end hook was the denim jacket Nathan wore when he was 7, the one with the fraying dinosaur patch he used to show off to every kid on the playground. Amber had threatened to toss it during her decluttering phase a few years back, but I'd rescued it like a wounded animal. I reached for it. My fingers trembled as they closed around the cotton sleeve. I pressed it against my chest and inhaled deeply, half hoping, foolishly, that some trace of my little boy still lingered in the fabric. But of course it didn't. Time strips that away too. I held the jacket tight, the way you hold something irreplaceable. And in that lonely hallway with its flickering overhead light, a thought crossed my mind, one I'd tried to avoid for years. I'm no longer Nathan's mother. I'm a body in the guest house, a charity case with a spare key. The kettle on the kitchen counter began to whine, pulling me back from the edge of my own thoughts. I walked over and made myself tea. Earl Grey, Daniel's favourite. The steam curled upward like soft ghosts, warm and familiar. But even that couldn't quiet the ache pressing against my ribs. I walked to the window, lifting the curtain with 2 fingers. Nathan and Amber were outside, dragging their matching suitcases. Expensive, monogrammed, the kind of luggage sets couples on glossy magazines carried on their way to private jets. Amber laughed at something Nathan said, the sound bright and effortless. When she lifted her arm to wave at the neighbour across the street, her sleeve slid down. And there it was. The bracelet. Platinum. Diamond-studded. Custom-made. A piece she once bragged cost more than a used car. My heart didn't break at the sight of it. It calcified. Money was tight, she had said. Tight. But not tight enough to leave behind a diamond bracelet. Not tight enough to rent a luxury cabin on a 10-day cruise. Not tight enough to forget to include the old woman living 20 feet away. The very woman who raised the man she now called her husband. I watched the Uber pull up. Watched them hug the driver like old friends. Watched the door close on the both of them. Nathan looked my way. Not at me, but at the guest house in a general sense. I lifted my hand and waved. He didn't wave back. He just looked down at his lap, where I imagined his phone already glowed. I stayed at the window long after the car disappeared down the street. The snow began again, gently, insistently, settling over the bare branches of the maple trees I planted when Nathan was born. I remembered carrying him outside each autumn to show him the leaves turning gold. He used to giggle and grab fistfuls of fallen leaves like they were treasure. He used to look at me the way boys look at the people who make their world safe. Now he looked at me, like someone renting space on his property. When my tea turned cold, I set the mug in the sink and walked back to the fireplace. A single framed photo sat on the mantel. The 3 of us, at Disney World, standing in front of the mock cruise ship set. Nathan had insisted on wearing a plastic captain's hat. Daniel had laughed so hard the camera caught him with his eyes half shut. I looked young, younger than I remembered, and hopeful in a way that felt foreign now. I lifted the photo, brushed the dust from the glass, and whispered without meaning to, "What happened to us, baby?" No answer came, of course, just silence. Thick, old silence. Eventually I went to bed, though sleep didn't come until hours later. I lay staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with the wind outside. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, as the cold crept under the blankets and pressed against my spine, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not bitterness. Something quieter, sharper. A clarity I hadn't dared acknowledge until now. They thought they were leaving me behind. They thought I was too old, too soft, too dependent to matter. But they forgot one thing. I am the woman who built this family from nothing. I am the woman who survived grief, poverty, and the slow erosion of love. And I am not nearly as invisible as they believe. The seed was planted that night. A seed watered not by revenge, but by the truth. They needed a lesson I had avoided teaching for far too long, and I, quiet, forgotten, underestimated, was finally ready to give it. People think the sharpest pain comes from being hit with a hard truth. But that's not quite right. No. The deepest cut is when a truth confirms what you were desperately hoping wasn't real. It was the 3rd day of their trip, March 14th. I remember because it was Daniel's birthday. He would have been 72. I lit a candle for him that morning and let it burn until the wax ran cold, like I always did. No one else in this house remembered. Of course, no one else would. I had gone to the main house to grab a copy of Reader's Digest. Amber always had them scattered in the den, and I'd left mine out in the rain the night before. It wasn't snooping. Not really. I knew the code to the back door, and I just wanted 5 minutes in a room that didn't smell like mothballs and resignation. But fate has a funny way of leaving its trail in plain sight. And that trail came in the form of a folded piece of paper on the kitchen island. I wasn't looking for it. My eyes just landed on it, clean, crisp, and brand new. The logo at the top was unmistakable, Pacific Majesty Cruises. Below that, the guest reservation for cabin 302 and 303. Departure, Miami. Destination, Caribbean. Duration, 10 nights. The total, $12,800 in bold, underlined. Final payment confirmed. I stood there frozen, the paper suddenly weighing 5 pounds in my hands. $12,800. The exact estimate Nathan gave me for the roof repairs on the guest house just a month ago. The same urgent expense that had made them rethink finances for a while. They had said no to a Thanksgiving trip with me because of that roof. No to a new space heater. No to the wool coat I pointed out at the department store. The one on clearance. And now they were clinking champagne glasses on the deck of a floating palace. I didn't cry. But I did feel something snap. Something fine and quiet, like the thread in a hem giving way. I sat down at their marble countertop, the one I picked out 25 years ago before granite became trendy, and pressed the receipt flat with my palm. The digits swam for a moment, blurry from nothing but sheer disbelief. Then I reached for my purse and pulled out the old leather notebook I always carried, the one with frayed corners and ink-stained pages, filled with grocery lists, sermon notes, and memories I was afraid to forget. Tucked inside the notebook was a photograph. Nathan, age 5, in his tiny navy blue blazer, standing aboard a model ship at the Cleveland Children's Museum. His cheeks were red from excitement, one hand waving at the captain on the other end. His eyes, my God, his eyes. They sparkled like the ocean was real. Back then he loved ships. He loved maps. He used to say he'd captain one someday, take me to Alaska where the whales sang at sunrise. I ran my fingers along the edge of the photo, then placed it face down on the counter. The granite felt cold beneath it. Or maybe it was my hands. Or maybe it was me. My grip tightened around the notebook until my knuckles lost their color. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is loud, flailing, messy. What I felt was quieter than anger, more dangerous. It was grief, refined into steel. I stood up slowly. I left the receipt exactly where it was, let them know I saw, if they even remembered to notice. By the time I got back to the guest house, the sky had started to bruise with early twilight. I poured myself a small glass of sherry. The bottle had dust on it. I hadn't touched it since the last time we toasted. Years ago, when Nathan got promoted to VP and told me he was grateful for everything I sacrificed. Now I knew what that gratitude amounted to. $12,000 and change. And a ticket for one less passenger. I sat in the old recliner and stared at my cell phone. It was an outdated flip model, the kind people chuckled at in restaurants. But it still worked, and it still held one number I hadn't used in a long, long time. Clay Donovan. He wasn't family, not by blood. But he was there when Daniel passed, helped me with the paperwork, sat next to me at the board meeting when I handed over partial control of the travel investment Daniel and I made in 1998. Back then, it was just a dream. A tiny sliver of a regional cruise line that barely floated. But Daniel believed in it. We put our savings into it. I kept my name on the paperwork even after I handed over voting rights, because Daniel insisted. You never know when a ship will need its anchor, he'd said. And now, maybe that moment had come. I dialed the number. I thought my hands would shake. They didn't. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, deeper than I remembered, but unmistakable. "Clay here." I paused, a long inhale. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it win. "Hi, Clay. It's Maggie." He went quiet. Then warm but cautious. "Well, I'll be damned. Maggie Wilkins. You still alive out there?" "I am," I said, steady now. "And I'm calling in that favor. From 2007. Silence again. Then, "That's serious, huh?" I closed my eyes. "Yeah, it's that serious." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Clay had always been the kind of man who understood that some things are better explained in person. We hung up with a single promise. I'd have an answer in 48 hours. The call ended. I didn't cry. But that night, when I sat down with Daniel's photo on my lap, I whispered something into the dark. "They think I'm old, Dan. They think I've got no teeth left." I looked out the window. The snow had stopped falling. They forgot who taught them to swim. They say time is the great equalizer, that when you wait long enough, everything reveals itself. That morning, the truth arrived not with fireworks, not with fury, but with a quiet slip of paper slid under my door. It was a plain brown envelope, no name, no stamp. But the moment I saw it, I knew it was from Clay. I didn't open it right away. I brewed myself a cup of tea, letting the familiar sound of the kettle fill the stillness. When the tea was steeping, I sat at the small kitchen table and unfolded the envelope with careful hands. Inside were three things: a black keycard with a gold emblem, a one-page ownership document, a short, handwritten note from Clay that simply read, "All confirmed. You still own more than they think. The suite is yours. Discretion in place. C." I stared at the ownership document. Maggie Wilkins, 4.2% Class A. Ownership vessel, the Pacific Dual Privileges, Executive Access, Reassignment Rights, Owners, Suite, Shop for One. I let the words settle in my chest. The Pacific Jewel. That name felt like a memory from another life. Because it was. Daniel and I had invested in the company nearly 3 decades ago. Back then, it was a struggling regional cruise line. Daniel believed in its potential. A rising tide, he called it. Let's get on early. I'd been skeptical. We were still paying off the mortgage. Nathan was just starting middle school, and I didn't see the point in cruise ships when we couldn't even afford summer camp. But Daniel had vision. He handled the paperwork, filed the investment under the Wilkins Family Trust, and made sure both our names were listed. I didn't think twice about it after that. Life swept us up in other things. Illness, promotions, funerals, birthdays. And now here it was. Still mine. Still active. Still powerful. That afternoon, I opened the clunky old laptop I kept more out of habit than utility. It groaned to life like an aging dog, but eventually connected to the portal Clay had sent. I logged in. Passenger records, manifest data, executive override options, all there. I searched. Wilkins, Nathan. Guest, Amber Wilkins. Cabin 302? I clicked through their itinerary. Premium suite, balcony view, champagne on arrival, spa access. 1,000 little luxuries purchased on the same credit card they claimed couldn't cover my airfare. The same card I helped pay off years ago. I hovered over the Modify Reservation button. No hesitation, just clarity. I reassigned them to Cabin 12B, a small room below deck near the crew's laundry. No windows, twin bunks, hum of the engine as a lullaby. It wasn't cruelty, it was context. I needed them to understand something no suite could teach. Next, I reserved my own room. Owner's Suite, Shot 1, Maggie Wilkins. Status, VIP notes, identity withheld upon boarding, private access. special instructions. Guest requests anonymity and direct contact with captain upon arrival. I paused before typing. The final line. Do not notify cabin 12B of guests' presence for first 48 hours. They needed time to wonder what went wrong, to sit in discomfort without a scapegoat, to ask questions, before I offered answers. I closed the laptop. The room felt warmer, though the heater hadn't kicked on. Something had shifted. Not around me, within me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was at the mercy of someone else's choices. I felt capable, not vengeful, not angry, just awake. That evening, I pulled out the photo box from the linen closet. Dust drifted into the air like old ghosts. There it was, the photo from Nathan's 5th birthday. He stood on a mock cruise ship deck in Cleveland, wearing a plastic captain's hat, grinning like the world had just bowed at his feet. I was behind him, arms outstretched in case he fell, though he never looked back. He used to beg me to take him on a real ship. Just you and me, Mom, he'd say. We'll live on the ocean, like pirates, but with snacks. I held the photo to my chest and whispered, You loved ships because they felt free, but freedom isn't about running away. It's about remembering who gave you the boat. The next morning, I called Clay. You ready? He asked, voice low and steady. Yes, I replied, but I have a few more requests. He waited. First, I want to meet the captain in private. Let him know who I am. I don't want drama. Done. Second, I want full access to the monitoring system. I want to watch, but I don't want to hear anything unless I say so. That's a bit dramatic for you. No, I said calmly. It's measured, like everything else I'm doing. He chuckled. And 302? They'll stay in 12B for at least 2 days. He was quiet for a moment. Maggie, you sure this is the way? I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and said, They don't need punishment. They need perspective. And I need my son back. After we hung up, I stood in the doorway of the guest house and looked across the yard toward the main house. The shutters were closed. The silence was comfortable, but not empty. I thought about how many years I'd spent stepping aside, staying quiet, being respectful. But being quiet doesn't mean you don't see. Being respectful doesn't mean you don't remember. And being old, well, that just means you've had time to learn which battles matter. I traced the edge of the keycard in my pocket. Then I whispered to myself, to Daniel, to the wind. Let the cruise begin. And softer still, it's time for a long overdue lesson. There's something poetic about boarding a ship. It's not just about the destination. It's the feeling of letting go of land, of anchors, of weight. I hadn't felt that kind of weightlessness in years, until that morning. The Miami port was already buzzing with noise when I arrived. Taxi doors slamming, children whining, porters whistling for tips. The heat hugged my skin tight. Not the biting cold of Ohio anymore, but thick, alive humidity. I wore a silk vest the color of champagne. Light, fluid, expensive. A gift I once wrapped for Amber but never gave. It had hung in the back of my closet for over a decade. That morning, I ironed it flat, slipped it on, and watched myself in the mirror with fresh eyes. My reflection wasn't some forgotten widow. It was a woman with spine, with reason, with power. I approached the private VIP entrance as instructed, walking past long lines of grumpy passengers baking under the Florida sun. Some glanced up as I passed, maybe curious, maybe envious, but I didn't meet their gaze. I'd been invisible for too long. Today, I would let them see me. Not as Nathan's mother, not as the woman in the guest house, but as someone they could no longer ignore. A young staff member in white gloves opened the velvet rope. "Ms. Wilkins?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled, radioed something discreetly, then extended an arm. "Captain's waiting for you." We walked through sleek hallways cooled by air conditioning, past orchid arrangements and shining brass rails. It smelled like lemon polish and new beginnings. The captain was waiting near the main staircase, tall, silver-haired, posture like marble. "Ms. Wilkins," he said, with a respectful tilt of the head. "Welcome aboard the Pacific Jewel." His voice held no trace of condescension, just warmth, like he knew who I was. Because now, he did. "I trust the arrangements have been handled?" I asked softly. "Yes, ma'am. Your suite is ready. The 48-hour restriction on cabin 12B is in place. You will not be disturbed." "Excellent," I said. He extended a sleek envelope. "Your personal access code and your preferred schedule for crew activity logs." I took it, thanked him, and allowed myself a very small smile. This wasn't revenge. It was orchestration. Meanwhile, and this part still makes me smile, Nathan and Amber were down below, sweltering in the regular boarding line, dragging their designer luggage through sticky pavement, arguing about sunscreen. They had no idea. Amber's hat kept sliding down her forehead. Nathan was sweating through his linen shirt. Their boarding group had been called nearly 20 minutes before, but some glitch in the system, mine, had reassigned their suite last minute, and the front desk couldn't explain why. I watched them from the upper deck through the glass, a wide, tinted panel that turned me invisible again, but on my own terms this time. Nathan was visibly irritated. Amber was, of course, louder. Her voice, even from here, carried that tone I knew so well, the one she used when Starbucks got her order wrong. I noticed her gesture wildly toward a staff member holding a clipboard. The young woman smiled nervously, shaking her head, pointing them toward the standard entrance. The heat, the noise, the lack of control. It all coiled around them. And I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. They needed this. Not the downgrade, the discomfort. Not the chaos, the contrast. I arrived at my suite 20 minutes later. It was at the very top of the ship, tucked into a corner most passengers never even glimpsed. The keycard clicked smoothly. When the door swung open, I paused, not because I was surprised, but because I wanted to feel it. Soft light, fresh orchids, a full panoramic window view of the Atlantic. This wasn't a room. It was a reckoning. I set down my bag, removed my shoes, and walked to the edge of the glass. Below, passengers were still shuffling on board, kids crying, suitcases bumping into ankles. And there they were. Amber fanning herself with a brochure, Nathan rubbing his temple. Amber was saying something, pointing, pacing, her hands flapping like angry wings. Then, for a split second, she stopped. Her eyes squinted upward toward the VIP deck. Her lips parted. She tilted her head, and just barely, her voice reached the air above. "Was that?" "No, couldn't be. Mum wouldn't wear silk." She laughed, brushing it off. I didn't move, didn't duck, didn't hide. Let her see. Let her wonder. Later that evening, the ship began to move, a gentle shift that made the glasses in my suite clink together like a toast. I poured myself something cold, walked barefoot to the balcony, and let the wind carry my thoughts. I imagined Amber opening the door to 12B. No balcony, no king-sized bed, no fruit plate. I imagined the confusion in Nathan's voice when he realized something had gone wrong. But not wrong enough to feel like sabotage. Just wrong enough to feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar. That was the point. Let them sit with it. Let them peel back the layers of entitlement they wrapped themselves in. Let them taste humility, served, chilled. As the sun dipped low, washing the sky in gold, I placed the old photograph of Nathan, 5 years old, fake captain's hat, on the dresser. He was smiling so wide, his eyes crinkled. "You used to love this, baby," I whispered. "Let's see if you still do. When you remember who brought you aboard." The first 24 hours passed like glass, quiet, reflective, and just sharp enough to cut if you weren't careful. I spent most of that time in silence, watching from behind tinted glass panels, unseen by the very people I'd once built my life around. There was a strange comfort in that invisibility, not the aching kind I'd felt in the guest house, but something more deliberate, like watching a memory unfold from the other side of the frame. Nathan and Amber, down in cabin 12B, were unraveling slowly. I didn't need the audio feed. I could read Amber's body language like a second language, the furrowed brows, the frantic gestures, the way her hands stayed on her hips like she was always 5 seconds from speaking to the manager of the universe. Nathan, though. Nathan was quieter. He paced, looked out the tiny porthole like he expected the view to change. He rubbed his face with both palms, a habit from childhood he never grew out of. They didn't know I was here. They didn't know anything had changed, only that something was off. They'd been told there'd been an administrative reshuffling of cabins due to mechanical maintenance, apologies, complimentary drink tickets, but no upgrades, no spa appointments, and certainly no king-sized suite with ocean views. I watched them try to accept it, to reason through it. But entitlement doesn't handle turbulence well. That evening, they finally emerged. I saw them from my suite, crossing the upper deck. Amber still in heels, despite the wind. Nathan trailing behind her with a frustrated slouch that made him look 10 years older than he was. I followed at a distance. It was dinner time. I'd asked the captain for no direct confrontation yet, but I couldn't resist watching the scene play out. I requested a corner seat at the upper-level dining balcony, just enough distance to see, not to be seen. They were seated below, by the back buffet. Amber was mid-rant, waving a menu at the waiter. "Lobster." I requested it ahead. It was confirmed. We're in the wrong cabin, in case no one's figured that out. The poor server apologized, pointing them toward the general seafood station. Nathan leaned in, muttered something. Amber scoffed. Then it came. She lifted her glass, champagne, I noted, and said just loud enough, "Well, cheers to the old lady at home, probably microwaving soup while we suffer on this floating motel." Nathan laughed. A short, dry sound. Not loud, not malicious. But it reached me like a slap anyway. I didn't flinch. But I did reach for the remote. With a press of my thumb, the sound went silent on my screen. Not because I couldn't bear to hear more, but because I'd heard enough. I sat still for a long time after that. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from restraint. Because the thing no one ever tells you about being a mother is this. Your love doesn't make you bulletproof. It makes you porous. Every careless word, every shrug, every moment they forget you. It sinks into you like rain through wood. You carry it, quietly, forever. I looked across the table. Daniel's photograph sat propped next to a candle. He'd always said Nathan would find his way. "He's just figuring out how to be a man," he'd told me once, during one of our late-night kitchen talks. "It's a messy map, Mags. Don't judge him by the first detour." But this wasn't a detour. This was deliberate. And yet, I didn't hate him. I just hurt. The next morning, I requested the second phase. I met with the ship's concierge in private, a kind woman named Inez, who handled everything from rerouting room service to putting out fires among honeymooners. I need the guest cards for cabin 12B, locked out of all premium access, I told her. Spa, lounge, room service, casino, everything. As of 10 a.m. She hesitated. Ma'am, that's a full downgrade. I know, I said. It's necessary. Very well. She paused, then leaned in, not unkindly. Forgive me for asking, but are they family? I smiled softly. Yes, that's why I'm doing this. That afternoon, the final switch took place. Nathan and Amber returned from the pool deck to find their keycards no longer worked. They tried again. Nothing. A passing attendant offered to help, but couldn't explain the issue. They were led to the front desk, where they were told their account had been updated. The new room was waiting, smaller, darker, louder. The air near the engine hums constantly, a kind of reminder that luxury is not a guarantee, but a borrowed comfort. I watched it all unfold from my suite. Sipping tea I brewed myself. No staff, no orders barked, just me, and silence, and control. Not over them, over my own story. That evening, I walked the ship alone, past the bars, the lounges, the shops. I passed groups of passengers laughing, dancing, drinking out of coconuts with little paper umbrellas. I passed Nathan and Amber on the lower deck, sitting silently near the railing. Their clothes weren't as crisp, their faces not as smug. They looked, for the first time, uncomfortable. Good. Because discomfort cracks things open. And sometimes, that's the only way light gets in. I returned to my suite, removed the silk vest, and folded it neatly into the drawer. Then I opened the small wooden box where I kept the note Daniel had written me the day we signed the investment paperwork all those years ago. It read, "One day, this will be the boat we teach our son to sail. If we raise him right, he'll remember who showed him the ropes." He didn't forget the ropes. He forgot the hands that tied them, but not for long. By the third day, the silence had shifted. It wasn't the peaceful kind anymore. It had a pulse. Tense, uneasy. The kind that builds right before a thunderstorm cracks open the sky. I'd felt that kind of pressure before. In labor, in grief, in marriage, and now, in justice. Amber finally snapped at 8:14 a.m. The camera feed showed her pacing the hallway outside cabin 12B in slippers far too expensive for a room that smelled faintly of diesel. Her voice, though muffled through the glass, was unmistakable. Loud, shrill, slicing through the corridor like a blade with no handle. "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to the manager. No, the captain. Now." Nathan sat on the edge of the bunk bed behind her, rubbing his temples. I recognized the look. He wore it when he was 12 and got caught cheating on a book report. Except now, there was no principal. Just the sea. And his mother, quietly orchestrating the reckoning. They'd had enough of the crew-level existence. No private balcony, no room service, no monogrammed robe. And the final straw. Their onboard account had been downgraded to basic tier. Amber had tried to order oysters the night before. She'd been told the buffet was free. À la carte was not. Nathan didn't even argue anymore. He just chewed slower, swallowed harder. Amber, however, wasn't built for surrender. She marched, barefoot no less, up to the concierge deck, dragging Nathan behind her like a storm she summoned on demand. I was already there. I had taken my breakfast in the exclusive lounge that morning. Soft scrambled eggs, smoked salmon, the kind of meal Amber used to Instagram before I even knew what a hashtag was. I'd requested a quiet table in the corner with a clear view of the corridor. My silk vest was pressed. My hair was pinned. I looked nothing like the woman who gardened behind the guest house in Crocs and faded flannel. The double doors burst open. Amber entered first, dishevelled, sweating, furious. Nathan trailed behind, looking small. The irony didn't escape me, that the man who once asked me for Lego money now stood on a ship he thought he paid for, completely powerless. Amber spotted me. She stopped mid-step, her breath catching like a stitch in her side. "Mom?" I stood slowly, took one sip from my teacup, set it down with care, then turned. "Hello, Amber." Her lips parted. You're on this ship?" Nathan looked between us, speechless. "Let me guess," Amber said, her voice rising. "You followed us here? What, did you track our itinerary? God, you're unbelievable. This is obsession. It's harassment. You crazy old woman." "Amber," I said gently, not a raise in tone, not even a blink. "Stop." Her face flushed red. "You have no right." I turned slightly, just enough to catch the attention of the officer standing nearby. The uniformed man nodded and walked toward us. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Wilkins?" he asked, addressing me. Amber stared. "What? Why is he talking to you?" I didn't answer. The officer did. "Captain informed us to extend full deference to Ms. Wilkins. She's not just a guest. She's the principal shareholder of this ship." Silence. Amber blinked. Once. Twice. Nathan's mouth fell open. "What?" I stepped closer. No anger, just presence. "I'm not here by accident, Amber, and I didn't follow you. I own a share of the ship your ticket paid for." She laughed, bitter and breathless. "So this was all, what, payback? Revenge?" "No," I said calmly. "It's education." Nathan took a step forward. "Why didn't you just talk to us?" I tilted my head. "I did, for years. Every time you ignored me. Every time you smiled while saying, 'We don't have the budget for that.' Every time you closed the door." He lowered his eyes. Amber tried one last time. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I said. "But it reminds me that I'm not powerless." The captain appeared a few moments later. Crisp, white uniform, unreadable expression. He addressed the group without hesitation. "Ms. Wilkins holds executive-level ownership. She has authority over cabin assignments and guest privileges, as per our corporate charter. Any reallocations were well within her rights." Amber sputtered. "You're siding with her?" "I am stating facts," he said simply. Nathan said nothing. Amber shook her head, furious. "This is ridiculous. We should have you removed." The captain didn't flinch. "She cannot be removed. You, however, can." That did it. She shut her mouth. I gave her credit for that. It was the first wise thing she'd done since boarding. Later that evening, I returned to my suite. I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't triumph. This wasn't revenge. It was release. I watched the sun slide into the ocean from the balcony. The sky turned the color of peaches and fire. I thought of Daniel. "You were right," I whispered. "He needed this. They both did." I let out a long breath. Not dramatic. Just clean. Below, the waves broke in slow rhythm. And somewhere 2 decks down, my son sat in a room that finally matched the distance between us. But not for long. Not forever. First, they had to sit in the discomfort. Then, maybe, they could come back. Guilt has a sound. It doesn't announce itself loudly, not at first. It starts with small hesitations, slower footsteps, a knock that barely touches the door. And when I heard that knock, soft and nervous just past sunrise, I knew it wasn't a steward. I knew it wasn't the captain. It was my son. I opened the door, and saw Nathan standing there, his shoulders slack, eyes swollen like he hadn't slept, wearing the same polo shirt from yesterday, now wrinkled and damp with sweat. He wasn't the confident man in the tailored suit. He wasn't the boss, the provider, the son-in-law on a cruise. He was a boy again, my boy, and he was lost. He didn't speak, just dropped his eyes and whispered, "Can I come in?" I nodded. He stepped over the threshold like he didn't believe he was allowed. Then, right as I turned to gesture to the table, I heard a soft sound behind me. Fabric, knees, floor. When I looked back, Nathan was kneeling. Not performatively, not dramatically, just quietly. His voice cracked. "Mum, I don't even know where to start." I didn't move. I let the weight of silence carry the gravity it deserved. He took a shaky breath. "I treated you like furniture, background, a convenience. And it wasn't Amber's fault. It was mine. I let myself believe you'd always be there. Quiet, accepting, out of the way." He swallowed. "When I saw you standing in that suite, when the captain called you a shareholder, I felt small. But not because you made me feel that way, because I realized I've been small, selfish. I'm sorry." He looked up. His voice thinned. "I'm sorry, Mom." My throat burned, but I stayed composed. I didn't offer a quick rescue. I didn't tell him it's okay because it wasn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, "Get up. Sit down. There's something I want to show you." I laid a printed form on the table. Nathan sat, eyes scanning the bold header. "Onboard work program. Temporary service crew." Underneath, his name and Amber's. "I've arranged for both of you to join the work rotation," I said, pouring him tea. 6-hour shifts, rotating assignments. You'll do the things most guests never think about. Things the staff does to keep this ship running. He stared. "You want us to work?" I met his eyes. "No, I want you to earn." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "I'm not doing this to shame you, Nathan. I'm doing this to return to you what comfort stole from you. Perspective, gratitude, and maybe, if there's still something left in you, humility." He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. I continued. "You said you wanted to repay me for what you've taken for granted. Well, this is how. You and Amber will work to cover the roof money you misused. But more than that, I want you to remember what it feels like to serve." He exhaled. "She's not going to like this." I leaned back quietly. "She doesn't have to, but she does have to do it." He took the form, read it again, then looked at me, and in the smallest, most honest voice I'd heard from him in years, he said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." That afternoon they started. Amber in a crew polo 2 sizes too big, rubber gloves, and a scowl sharp enough to cut metal. Nathan in steel-toed shoes and a name tag that read, "Trainee." He was assigned to the cargo hold. His job, unloading crates, organizing supply inventory, and taking stock in the heat of the underdeck storage areas. Amber was assigned to housekeeping on Deck C, laundry sorting, linen rotation, and sanitation prep. She protested, loudly, but the captain had been briefed, and the crew followed orders with professional discretion. They treated Nathan and Amber like every other new hand, firm but fair. They didn't mock. They didn't excuse. They just handed them the mop and pointed to the stains. I didn't watch them that day. Not through monitors. Not through windows. Some lessons can't be witnessed. They have to be lived. But I did check the crew logs that evening. Day 1. Mr. Wilkins asked where to find gloves instead of pretending he didn't need them. Mrs. Wilkins cried once. was handed water and kept working. Day 2. Nathan clocked in 10 minutes early, asked for extra crates. Amber stopped complaining, folded 120 towels without comment. The small things, they mattered. Maybe more than the apology. On the third night, I walked past the employee mess hall. Through the open hatch, I saw Nathan seated on a bench with other crew members, his polo damp with sweat, arms resting on the table, a half-eaten sandwich in front of him. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't scrolling. He was listening to a dishwasher named Jorge tell a story, and he was smiling. Later that night, Nathan knocked again. This time, he didn't kneel. He stood straighter. Not arrogant, just steady. "Laundry's no joke," he said with a smirk. I raised an eyebrow. "Amber?" She folded towels until her hands cramped. She didn't talk for 2 hours after. We both laughed. It was the first time I laughed with my son in maybe 5 years. He looked at me then, seriously. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet," he said. "I know I have more to earn." I nodded. "You do. But thank you. For this. For not yelling. For not disappearing. For holding the line." I reached across the threshold, took his hand, and gave it a squeeze. "Motherhood," I said, "isn't about spoiling. It's about remembering who your child could be, and waiting just long enough for them to remember too." He swallowed. "I'm remembering." That night, I sat alone on the balcony again. The sky above was a field of stars. I lit a candle, placed it beside Daniel's photo, and whispered, "He's coming back, Dan. One shift at a time." Then I closed my eyes and let the sea sing me to sleep. The thing about transformation is that it rarely comes with trumpets. It comes in exhaustion, in silence, in surrender, and sometimes in a mop bucket and a broken fingernail. Amber lasted 3 days. Barely. On the 4th morning, she reported to her shift late, wearing yesterday's lipstick and a scowl sharp enough to cut steel. I heard from the crew log that she snapped at the laundry supervisor, refused to fold another towel, and demanded to see someone with real authority. Her exact words? "I'm being psychologically abused by a woman with too much money and not enough boundaries." By noon, she had locked herself in one of the spa changing rooms and called the emergency concierge line. Not for seasickness, not for injury, but for a mental health consult. "I'm being gaslit," she told the staffer, "by my mother-in-law. I need to speak to a ship psychologist, immediately." I had anticipated this moment. I made one call the week before we departed. To an old friend, Dr. Ronald Chase, retired Navy therapist, former trauma counselor, and someone who once spent 4 hours talking me through Daniel's final days. He owed me a favor. He'd boarded quietly in Miami, per my request, under a guest wellness program. Amber didn't know that. They met in the observation lounge, a soft blue room with low light and soundproof glass. She walked in, arms crossed, a pair of designer sunglasses perched dramatically on her head like a crown of irritation. Dr. Chase waited with his usual calm, notebook closed, no judgment in his eyes. "I just want this documented," she said immediately, "because I might file something when we get home." What she's doing? It's emotional warfare. He leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." She launched into it. The unfair downgrade, the manual labor, the sudden loss of privileges, and the humiliation of being made to clean bathrooms like some cruise line Cinderella. When she finally paused, breathless, Dr. Chase nodded and asked, "And you believe this was an act of personal vengeance?" Amber scoffed. "Obviously." He tilted his head, then asked simply, Tell me one thing she's done to you that wasn't rooted in truth. Amber blinked. What? I mean, he said gently, has she lied to you? Stolen from you? Raised her voice? Publicly embarrassed you? No, but has she put your health at risk? No. Your marriage? Amber looked down. Not directly. She asked you to work, he said, alongside your husband, to earn something you misused. That's not revenge, Amber. That's consequence. And it's delivered with more grace than most people have the patience for. Amber crossed her arms tighter, but her lips trembled slightly. She blindsided us. She taught you, he corrected. You just weren't ready to be the student. And then, with the gentlest precision, he added, Maggie Wilkins isn't punishing you. She's loving her son the only way he'll understand, by showing him how far he's drifted and offering him a path back. Amber didn't reply, but she didn't stand up either. I didn't hear from her that day, but I saw Nathan. Around dinner, I passed the loading dock on deck 2 and found him sitting on a crate, wiping his forehead with a rag. His uniform was stained, his knuckles were scraped. But his eyes, they were different, less guarded, more tired, but also quieter, honest. He looked up when he saw me. Hey, he said, almost shy. You all right? I asked. He nodded. We moved 4 pallets of bottled water today. I never want to see another cap again. I chuckled. How's your back? Ruined. He smiled. I did too. He hesitated, then added, Amber met with someone today, the ship's therapist. I know, I said softly. He looked surprised. You arranged that too? I arranged someone to listen. What she says is up to her. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. Did you plan all this? From the beginning? I met his gaze. Not the details, just the lesson. He exhaled. It's working. That night, I walked the upper deck after midnight. The ship hummed beneath me, an endless low vibration, steady and alive. The ocean stretched out like velvet under the moonlight, infinite and calm. I passed the crew galley. Through the window, I caught sight of Nathan again. Alone this time, standing over a sink, rinsing his lunch container. Not a word. No performance. Just a man washing his own dish. And somehow that meant more to me than any apology ever could. In my suite, I lit another candle. It had become my evening ritual now. A small flame beside Daniel's photo, a whisper of presence. He's softening, I said aloud. Not breaking. Not yet. But bending. I touched the corner of the frame, and she's beginning to listen. Maybe not to me, but to the silence around her. I didn't need them to suffer. I needed them to see. And slowly, painfully, they were beginning to. The next morning, a small envelope was slipped under my suite door. Inside was a short note, unsigned. We folded towels side by side today. She didn't complain. I didn't correct her. Thank you for giving us the space to figure it out. N. I held the note in my hands like it might crumble. Then I placed it in the drawer beside Daniel's letter, the one about the boat, and the sun, and the ropes. They were still untying the knots, but they were trying, and that was everything. The sea changes colour when you get close to the Caribbean. It's not something you notice all at once, more like a gradual shedding of shadow. The grey fades, the blue deepens, and then suddenly, it's turquoise. So clear, it's as if the water has finally remembered how to breathe. We docked that morning at a quiet inlet off St. Lucia, not a tourist trap stop, but a small private shore arranged by the line for premium guests. The kind of place with white hammocks strung between palms and sand so soft It didn't crunch under your steps. I asked the captain for a special request that morning. I'd like to invite 2 passengers to the owner's suite today, I said. He nodded. It's time. I exhaled. Yes, if they're ready. He smiled gently. They are. I set the table myself. No staff, no steward, just me and a simple lunch, warm bread, grilled fish, and a pitcher of chilled mango tea. No wine, no flowers, just honesty. I waited. At 12:03, the doorbell chimed. I opened it to find Nathan and Amber standing side by side. They were different. Nathan's uniform was pressed, but wrinkled at the elbows, his hair damp from work. His eyes softer. There was no defensiveness, no charm, just presence. Amber wore no makeup, no earrings, no forced smile, just a quiet, unfamiliar stillness, the kind that follows long hours of thinking in silence. No one spoke at first. Then Nathan stepped forward and extended something toward me, a napkin, folded, uneven, creased at the corners, smudged slightly with— was that lemon oil? I was on kitchen duty this morning, he said. We were folding linens. I made this for you. It's clumsy. I know. I took it with both hands. Con shin loi, me. He didn't look away. I understand now. You didn't owe us anything, but we owed you everything. I looked down at the napkin. It was folded into the shape of a heart, poorly but lovingly. One side was crooked. The fabric was warm from his palm. I looked back up. He added, more quietly this time, you don't have to explain anything. I see it now. I see what you carried, what you gave, what you withheld, not out of fear but out of grace. There it was, the thing I'd waited not to hear, but to feel. Recognition, not of guilt, but of growth. I reached out and touched his face. Just lightly. The way I used to when he'd fall asleep in the back seat during long drives home from school. My son, I said, my voice cracking for the first time in days. You haven't disappointed me. You just got lost for a while. But you came back. That's all I ever prayed for. He pulled me into an embrace, strong and shaking and real. I held on. Not because I needed to anymore, but because I finally could. Amber stood still, eyes glassy. I've been awful to you, she said. For years, not just this week. She took a breath. When I married him, I thought, I was supposed to start something new. I didn't realize I was entering a story already half written, a story you built, and I didn't read it. I just scribbled over it. I smiled sadly. It's not too late to learn the language. She looked down. I don't know if you can ever trust me. I can, I said simply. If you keep showing up as the woman you were this week, not the one in heels, but the one in gloves. Amber laughed, wiping her cheek. Those gloves smell like bleach and regret. Good, I replied. That's how healing starts. We sat, ate slowly, spoke in soft tones. No one reached for a phone. No one talked about when we get back. We stayed in that moment, rare, unguarded, holy in its quietness. Nathan told me about Jorge from sanitation, who made jokes in 3 languages. Amber described a teenage dishwasher who taught her how to fold a towel like a swan. They weren't stories of struggle. They were stories of shift. Perspective had come not through lecture, but labor. After lunch, Nathan stood and pulled something from his pocket. A small box. I found this when we were clearing out the storage room, he said. It must have fallen behind one of the old wardrobes back home. I was going to give it to you last year. Forgot. Thought it was too small a thing by then. He handed it to me. I opened the lid. Inside, Daniel's watch. The one I gave Nathan on his wedding day. The one he never wore again. Until now. The leather band had been replaced, the face polished. The second hand still ticked softly, like a heart not ready to give up. "I want you to have it back," he said, "but only if you believe I've earned it again." I didn't answer. I buckled it onto his wrist myself. "You haven't just earned it," I whispered. "You've remembered it." We stepped outside onto the suite's private balcony. The view of the island stretched out in golden light. Palm trees swayed. A sailboat drifted lazily in the distance. Amber leaned on Nathan's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, and I stood beside them. Not above, not behind, but with, together. Not perfectly healed, but no longer broken. Nathan turned to me. "When we get home, we'd like you to move back into the main house." I smiled. "I don't need a bigger room, just a warmer one." "We'll make it warm," Amber said. Nathan added, "And we'll fix the roof ourselves. This time, for real." I nodded, not out of obligation, but from peace. Later, as we disembarked to walk the sand for a short afternoon, I looked back at the ship, the Pacific Jewel, the boat that carried not just passengers, but reckonings, not just luxury, but labor and learning. Daniel had once called it our future. He wasn't wrong. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in weeks. Today, my son returned to me, not with flowers, not with apologies, but with a folded napkin, a shared meal, and the willingness to change. I closed the journal, lit a candle, watched its flames sway in the breeze coming through the open balcony door. Tomorrow, we would set course again. But tonight, I let go of the weight. There are endings that slam shut, cold, final, like a judge's gavel. And then there are endings like this one, soft, warm, slow as honey. Not because the pain didn't happen, but because at last, someone had the courage to sit in it long enough to understand. We left St. Lucia with fewer words and more eye contact. No more sharp edges, no more side comments, just shared meals, short walks, and long silences that didn't need filling. Nathan and Amber no longer hovered like guests on borrowed time. They moved through the ship like they belonged again, not because of money or privilege, but because they had earned it back. That morning, I woke up before dawn. The suite was dark, save for a silver sliver of moonlight on the floor. I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the balcony, barefoot. The ocean shimmered under the moon, endless and forgiving. And I thought, for the first time in years, maybe I am too. At breakfast, Nathan was already waiting. He had combed his hair, though it didn't quite stay flat, and his button-up shirt was clean but slightly wrinkled. A subtle detail that made him feel more real to me than the polished version I used to see at family holidays. He stood when I entered, out of habit maybe, or out of something deeper. "Morning, Mum," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Coffee's ready?" I nodded, sat across from him. "How's Amber?" "She's still asleep. Woke up early. Couldn't fall back. Said the sea sounds too much like her thoughts now." We both chuckled. "She's trying, you know," he said softly. "I can see that," I replied. "She's not pretending anymore. That's enough for now." He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket. "I wanted to give this to you earlier," he said, "but I needed to make sure I'd earned the right moment." He placed a small black box on the table and slid it toward me. I opened it slowly. Daniel's watch. The leather band had been replaced. Thick, sturdy, worn at the edges already. The glass had been cleaned, but the tiny chip at the bottom corner remained. The second hand ticked steadily, alive, like the heart of something old. still beating with purpose. I wore it during my shifts, Nathan said, every day, just to remind myself. Not who I was, but who I want to be. I looked up. His eyes met mine. Not as a son desperate to impress, but as a man standing on level ground. I don't want to keep it, he added. I want to share it. When I wear it, I'll remember you. And when you see it, I hope you remember me. Not the version of me that left you behind, but the one who found his way back. I reached across the table and fastened the watch on his wrist. You don't have to keep proving it, I said. I do, he answered. Every day. Amber joined us just before noon, hair up, no makeup, wearing a simple blue sundress that made her look young again, less curated. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I opened it. A handwritten budget. Roof repairs, $12,800, 5% interest. Apology tax, $13,440. Payment plan included, 12 months, 2 signatures. At the bottom. With love and accountability. Amber. I smiled, folded the paper neatly, and tucked it into my journal. I'm not here to collect, I said. Amber replied, We're not paying for the roof. We're honoring the foundation. That afternoon, we walked the deck together. 3 figures in the breeze, no longer fragments of something broken, but strands of a braid being rewoven. We passed the spa, where Amber once threw a tantrum over missing a facial. Now she nodded at the woman who cleaned the glass and said, Thank you. Sincerely. We passed the engine access hall, where Nathan had spent a week sweating and sorting boxes. Now he smiled at the cargo foreman and said, Still sore. And we passed a group of guests sipping champagne in the VIP lounge. None of us paused. As sunset painted the sea in tangerine and gold, the captain joined us near the helm. Docking in New Orleans tomorrow morning, he said. Smooth sail from here. I looked at Nathan. He looked at me. Then I turned to the captain. Actually, I said, voice steady, we'd like to change the itinerary. He blinked. Ma'am? Set course for Minnesota. There was a pause. Ma'am, with respect, there are no ports in Minnesota. I smiled. I know, but the train can take us from Chicago. He hesitated. Why Minnesota? Nathan answered for me. Because that's where the maples change color in October. The captain tipped his hat. Understood. That evening, we sat on the upper deck under string lights and open sky. No music, no schedule. Just laughter and one more shared meal. I brought out the photo again, the one from Disneyland. The little boy in the oversized captain's hat. The mother with tired eyes and hope on her face. The husband holding them both. I used to think that picture was a memory, I said. Now I think it was a promise. Nathan leaned back in his chair. You kept it. No, I corrected. You helped fulfill it. Amber raised her glass. To the people we're still becoming. We clinked and drank and breathed. Later that night in my cabin, I wrote one last entry in my journal. Today, we turned north. Not because the route demanded it, but because our story deserved it. For the first time, this family is not bound by guilt or distance. We are choosing each other, fully, consciously, beautifully. I closed the book. The ship moved forward, slicing gently through the sea, not toward luxury, not toward escape, but towards something so much harder to find. Home. Maggie didn't need anyone to apologize with words. She let them apologize through every day of labor, every drop of sweat, every lowered gaze that finally learned to think of others. She didn't reclaim a house. She reclaimed hearts. In this story, Revenge does not lie in the pain she inflicted, but in the awakening she ignited. And the greatest victory is making people realize they once hurt the very person who loved them the most. Perhaps forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but about choosing not to let it block the future. If you have ever suffered in silence like Maggie, ever been hurt because the people you love no longer saw you, leave a single dot in the comments. You don't need to say anything, just one dot. So Maggie, and all those like her, will know they are not alone.